Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. My name is Clayton Fletcher, and I'm your host. And today, I am in bucolic, gorgeous Baltimore, Maryland. Happy to be bringing you yet another edition of the world's longest running poker strategy podcast. I am not alone, guys. I have two guests for you this week. I'm going to introduce the one whose name will be very familiar to many of you first. He is a 5-time poker author. He's got final tables at both the World Poker Tour and the European Poker Tour, and he's one of the top poker coaches in the world, if not the top poker coach in the world. Most importantly, he's a dear personal friend of mine, Mr. Alex Fitzgerald. Alex, how have you been, sir?
I've been great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you've been on quite a bit lately, and I told you you're welcome to come on the podcast as often as you want. I feel like you were just on like yesterday telling us about your fourth poker book, and now we're going to have your fifth poker book, and you have a co-author, correct?
Yes, sir. We do this time.
So that means we are going to have a first-time guest that I'm happy to introduce to all of you. He is an attorney by trade. He's also a very serious, I guess you could call it a serious amateur poker player, more than a weekend warrior, and he actually co-authored a poker book with the Assassinato here. Topher Goggin, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Clayton. I appreciate it. You know, you listed Alex's final tables. I did make a final table in Mike's garage 2 weekends ago. I'm not sure that counts quite the same, but I did want to get that out there.
More impressive than EPT Prague could ever hope to be.
Exactly.
It was the table that was final, Topher. So technically, it was a final table. That works for me.
Right. Exactly. So Topher, how do you know my friend Alex anyway?
So I discovered Alex back in, let's see, it's got to be about 2014, 2015. Jonathan Little released a book called Excelling at No Limit Hold'em, which was a compilation series with like 20 different authors who wrote chapters. And so I bought this book and I'm reading through it. And about halfway in, there's this chapter by a guy named Alex Fitzgerald. I've never heard of this dude. And I read it and it was, I mean, life-changing might be strong language, but it totally approached poker in a way that I had never seen before. I can still remember some of the examples that were in there. And it was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of some of this stuff this way. Namely, it was your example that you use, Alex. You can go into it about raising out of the small blind in an unopened pot and looking at what kind of garbage the big blind would have to defend with to prevent you from automatically profiting with any two cards. And it was just one of those eye-opening moments. Got to the end of that chapter and it said, oh, by the way, this guy gives lessons. And so I basically had badgered my parents for lessons as a Christmas present because they wanted something to give me. And so they sprung for the lessons. I met Alex there. We did some lessons. I tried to hire him as a ringer for our tag team out at the WSOP. That didn't go quite as well as we all expected. But we've stayed friends since then. So that's sort of how it got started. And we've been in touch over the years and eventually led to this project.
Shout out to Jonathan Little, by the way, connecting you guys in the first place. Jonathan's also a friend of mine. He lives in New York City, too, as Alex, you did at one point. Topher, have you ever lived in New York? Because if not, we might have to kick you right off the podcast.
Well, thank goodness I spent a summer working there in law school in NYU student housing. That turned out that the apartment building that I was in was at the site of the Mercer Street Theater where my uncle performed in a play in the 70s or maybe the 60s. And apparently that building fell down in the middle of the night and they built the apartment building that I randomly was assigned to in the summer of 2004. So yes, I have lived in New York City.
Wow, you just got yourself a ton of street credit. Myself, as a former theater major, that was good. That was a really good answer to the first serious question you've ever been asked on this podcast. Really good. Yeah. All right. So you guys become friends, and then at some point, somebody has the idea. The book is called Improve Your Poker Now. a guide for serious amateurs. So, whose idea was this book, and how did the book come about?
So I think I probably get the credit for the very first contact about it. And what happened here, sort of two things worked together. I was obviously consuming a ton of Alex's content. I bought the books, I'm watching the training courses, and it would oftentimes cross my mind that, oh my gosh, this stuff is terrific, but I'm not sure if these guys that I would play with in Mike's garage and so forth would benefit from quite this level, or if maybe it needed to be broadened from an explanation standpoint. That got coupled with a friend of mine asking, what book should I read? He was a newer player. He understood the rules. He knew the mechanics. This was not the guy who's getting the card in the gift shop that shows that three of a kind beats two pair, but wanted a strategy book. And I was like, well, there isn't a great book at that level. Harrington on Hold'em was so good back in the days. Both Alex and I admired that series beyond belief. But it was written in 2004, and the game has moved beyond a lot of those strategies. And so I wrote to Alex and said, I think your stuff would be the perfect content to take to this wider audience of people who have real jobs, they have real lives, but they love poker and they want to play better. And if you'd like, I'll help you with it. And then Alex, you can take it from there because you were the one who had to sell this to D&B Poker, and you managed to get that done.
Well, yeah, the other thing that was very great about this project is whenever somebody can really write, I try to take a moment and tell them, because it's not really something you hear people say to each other. But if someone is good at turning a phrase or writing a sentence, I feel like you should tell someone, hey, you should write that down. That's really good. And Topher would send me these ideas saying, hey, we could say it like this to help someone who maybe is a serious amateur, is getting into it, but doesn't know all the lingo and whatnot. And I kept going, wow, that's a fantastic way to put that. You should write that down. And then after he had a number of those in emails, I said, okay, I'm going to go talk to D&B because clearly we got a book here that would be applicable to serious amateurs. And then D&B's been great on this project, and it's been really fun since then. Now it's out. It's amazing.
Yeah. So, Alex, what was that like working with a co-author? I know that your previous work was more of a solo project. So, talk us through what it was like kind of collaborating with Topher on this one.
So, Topher actually made it so easy. I don't even feel that I'm qualified to comment. He asked for materials that he could look at just to confirm that we were on the same page as everything. So I sent him some of my training packages. The one that got used a lot was Master Tournament Poker in One Class Special Edition, which is, it's a form of poker that if I only have 5 hours with you and you're a serious amateur, it's going to make you a huge problem to deal with at the table. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to really put the odds in your favor. And he took that and made it very digestible for the average person through his writing. And then he kept sending things to me, and other than minor typos that happen to everybody when you're writing hundreds and hundreds of pages, I kept going, solid. Wow, cool. We're good to go. And then, yeah, I added a few sections, but it was, Topher really got a lot of the things streamlined. So that was excellent.
Well, it's a pretty smart move, I think, on your part, Topher, to approach Alex like that, and maybe just, having the business background and maybe the experience as a lawyer, it's pretty hard to kick down some of these doors as maybe someone whose name is, let's say, a little less known than Alex's, to collaborate with him. But it sounds like maybe you did most of the heavy lifting on this one. Is that right?
Well, I mean, in terms of time spent at a keyboard, that's true. But this is Alex's stuff, okay? I'm here as a translator because I'm the guy who is more on the ground with people that are serious amateurs, but people who have real jobs. These are the people who are like Alex's students. And so I'm kind of along as that translator there. And so I think that while, yes, I'm the one who cranked out some of the words, it's all Alex's stuff. Nobody wants to know my thoughts about poker. They want Alex's strategies, and that's why we needed him. I couldn't have sat down and done this on my own. But it really was a team effort from that standpoint. And the way that we broke it down is, and this is explained in the book, that I wrote that first draft and then we worked on it together. And then each chapter has an Alex's keys section at the end that Alex wrote. I had this vision of this AK Ace King graphic that would go with it. We never did that, but it was a great idea, I thought. But Alex's keys at the end of every section. And then the 9th chapter of the book, chapter 10 is just kind of conclusions and sending you off. But the last main chapter of the book is a 5-hand quiz written by Alex himself in his style. And that's important for 2 reasons, I think. Number one, because I wanted him to shine through that part of the book to figure out, have you internalized this? Do you understand it? But also because both Alex and I envisioned this book as kind of a launch pad or a bridge to more poker training materials, that you can read this book and be good and beat almost everybody that you're going to run into. But some people are going to get the bug and want to go further. And if they're not ready for that yet, if they were going to pick up a book about, GTO, solvers, that type of stuff, and they'd just be lost, this will bridge that gap to Alex's other books and other people's training materials. And I know, Clayton, that you've got a sponsor here on this program that you want to talk about. And we're here for people that aren't ready for that GTO stuff yet. But by the time they're through this book, if they want to keep going, it should be accessible to them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so our regular listeners will know this, but GTO Wizard has been a great partner for us. And what we try to do is, after we talk about a hand, like I know Alex has a tournament hand that we're going to run through in just a few minutes here. What we'll do is, in next week's episode, I'll go back and run the hand through the solver and figure out what GTO Wizard would do differently than maybe what the hero in this hand happened to do. But yeah, I want to go back to Harrington on Hold'em, which you guys brought up a little while ago, because for me, that book was kind of like my Bible when I was making the transition from 7-card stud, which used to be the most prominent game in any casino.
Oh, yeah.
100 years ago, to learning to take Texas Hold'em more seriously, specifically No Limit Hold'em. In most casinos before, let's say, Chris Moneymaker 2003, you'd walk into your local card room and they'd have any limit of 7-card stud and limit Hold'em, and they hardly ever had no limit tournaments. Those books, the blue one and the red one, my copies of those books had writing in the margins, highlighters throughout. The pages were ragged and jagged from all of the years that I had spent just, reviewing and reviewing and reviewing. Like, I read those books like I was studying for a PhD in poker, and that was the textbook. To the point you made earlier, Topher, those books are fairly obsolete now. I mean, there are certain concepts that I think are still very valuable. But yeah, it was time for an update. But the target market for Harrington on Hold'em wasn't for people who never played the game before. Like you say, needs to go to the gift shop and find out what beats what with the little card. But they also weren't, it wasn't really aimed at the people that were already making a living playing tournament poker every single day of their lives. So Alex, with that sort of backdrop, how would you define a serious amateur? So who is this guide for serious amateurs actually for?
Well, you're making me think about when I first read Harrington on Hold'em. I was 16 years old. I was working at an Arby's, and instead of just booking me for the entire day and paying me, they gave me a split shift, which meant between 2:30 and 4 p.m. I wasn't working. So I didn't have enough time to get home, but I couldn't leave either, and I wasn't getting paid. So from 2:30 to 4 every day, I would just read Harrington on Hold'em, and it was really applicable at that time because it was the first. One of the problems that poker players have is they're just not as well spoken as maybe they should be because they live in their heads when it comes to dealing with poker hands. I know that's definitely something I struggle with, which is sometimes I'll do something at the table and people will go, "Wow, how'd you do that?" And I have to go, "I don't know. Give me a second," and I'll have to work on it for days to really get a good analysis of what I was working on subconsciously in that hand. And truthfully, if nobody ever asked me the question, I doubt I would sort it out. So Harrington on Hold'em, I feel, was a flagship project at that time because he'd done so well in the World Series main event and in consecutive years. And I think they had a lot of great translators like Topher. And that's why that book was just so dang accessible. And we've tried to do something similar there, where if you are a serious amateur, if you are working another job, be that Arby's or accounting or plumbing or whatever it is, you know some of the lingo, but not all of the lingo. So we try to fill in. Topher actually does a really funny glossary, which I really loved, where the definitions really stick in your head. And we try to fill in all the terminology so you're working with the same terms as everybody else, and then gradually introduce the slightly more advanced stuff, but still keep it on the basis of, hey, you're playing a tournament with, this isn't going to help you in high rollers, but if you're playing like a $400 tournament in Las Vegas versus other normal people from Wisconsin or Northern California or whatever it is, this will give you a leg up because this will help you versus the common mistakes that average people make, while also giving you a basis in the fundamentals of the theory.
Yeah, I love it. It kind of reminds me, Alex, every summer I usually get 2 or 3 opportunities to work for Poker Go as a color commentator. And they'll pick a tournament that is unlikely to have like a huge high roller audience. Like they're not going to have me do like the 50K Players Championship, right? I'll do like the Millionaire Maker or the Colossus, the one where a lot of the people watching might be friends of the mostly amateur players that have somehow made this final table. And they want me to make it fun and accessible, but not to speak the language that we pros might use when we're talking to each other about, ranges and balance and this kind of stuff. It's more about just trying to explain things in, I guess you could say, layman's terms. A guy who works at Arby's or perhaps in a law firm would understand what I'm saying. And that's what really, as I've just started to delve into this book, what I'm seeing already is that it feels like that is the magic of this book, is that you're making complex concepts less complex, maybe for people that are still kind of learning the type of things that might be in that funny glossary. Or you're giving a voice to an audience that's kind of somewhere in between, like the students who pay top dollar for GTO Wizard Premium or whatever it is. That's a lot of money, right? They need it because they're playing high rollers against other crushers. It's like how to beat other robots at poker. And it's not the guy who's just like, wait, so what's a big blind? Right? We're somewhere in
Yeah.
amateur. Yeah. So, yeah, kudos to you guys, because I think you really found the right tone there.
I think Alex hits the nail on the head. The guy that we're looking for is the one who goes to the WSOP for a week, not the guy who rents an Airbnb for 6 weeks and that's his life, but the guy who loves poker, maybe plays a tournament monthly at his local casino, plays with his friends, for God's sake wants to beat his family when they play at Christmas because they're going to hear about it for the year, but wants to go out, take that shot, have that experience at the WSOP. I remember my first time there. I didn't play a hand for the first 2 hours, and I texted home to talk about how much fun I was having. I was scared to death. Next year, I came back and I finished 25th in a 1K by having 3 days of great luck. But that's the person that we're looking for, that they need to know how to play. They need to want to get better, but not be able to commit their life to poker. We think those people deserve the opportunity to improve as well. And we're trying to find things like that glossary, that will help them take the advice to the table. I'm a golfer, and in golf, there's a long-standing, I don't know if saying's the right term, but trying to take your driving range game to the golf course. Your golf game gets lost between the driving range and the course. I've had that experience so many times with poker books, poker training, that I watch it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. I'm going to do this the next time. I'm at the table 2 weeks later. I don't remember any of that. I can't do it in the moment. But we're trying to give you stuff like breaking down what we call our big 3 concepts, that when you're sitting at the table, you can draw on that. That's something that Alex has excelled at his entire career, is sayings, mnemonics the stuff that when you're at the table will actually stick in your head so you'll be able to execute. But that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely. And if I can interject really quickly, Topher, I'm really glad we talked about this because it seems like this part of the market really just doesn't get served as much as you would think. I came to a point in my poker career where I thought to myself, I don't want to be on tour all the time. All the time. I just didn't enjoy it. At a certain point, I wanted to play smaller games, and there was a lot of folks that just didn't even understand that. Like, why would you not want to be trying to play the highest stakes games? And then I noticed when it came to coaching, I had a lot more fun teaching retirees how to beat like $300 tournaments or like 2-5 games than just hearing somebody's grandma get super excited that she ran a triple shell bluff on somebody for the first time. It actually, I noticed, hey, I'm getting more hyped about this than they're getting. This is versus when I'm playing, it's kind of data entry. I've been doing it for a really long time. And yeah, it's really the thing that I love about it is, yeah, you lose the big fundamentals of your game when you try to memorize every single situation and every single theoretically correct ramification with your spare time. And if you just don't have the 40, 60 hours a week to commit to poker, it's going to be very difficult to commit to that rote memorization of all these small situations. So it was a lot of fun to give just easy mnemonics, easy. I call them anchors in my head. Like you always go to this anchor or always go to this anchor. You always go to, one of these 4 phrases, whatever it is, asking yourself fundamental questions. What hands does he not have? How often will there be another bet? What am I doing to that? Always be betting or raising. Does he do that with X? Whatever you want to go with. But having something you can fall back on when the pressure is on just helps so much in tournament poker.
listen, Alex is the one that when I'm reading his books, I get so excited because something clicks in my mind that I'm like, I have to put this book down and go to the casino right now. I'm going to go play some cards. He gets me hyped. He really does. You mentioned, before we get into the hand that you brought for us tonight, you mentioned the big 3. So let me ask you this, just to give our listeners a little bit of a tease of what they can expect to find in this book. What are the big 3? Topher, why don't you take this one?
Sure. So our big 3 concepts, and I'm going to break this down. I'll tell you what they are first. They are that as often as possible, we are going to try to play pots in position, heads up, with the betting lead. Now, somebody's going to see that and say, I've got to play heads up pots I'd never get to play in my life. It doesn't work at low stakes. We understand that. The idea is that that's like a temperature gauge. If you have all 3 of those things, that's the ideal scenario. You raise in position, get called only by the big blind. Perfect. That's when you've got the green light to do as much as possible. Meanwhile, when you're in a situation where you have 2, still pretty good. 1, now we got to be careful. And if you've got none of the big 3, let's say you've called out of the big blind in a multi-way pot, so you don't have the betting lead, you're multi-way, and you're out of position. Now you've got to be cautious. That's when you're going to have a hand. So everything that we talk about works back to that in terms of assessing your situation. And the one that I love the most of the 3, it's not like we're breaking new ground saying play pots in position. But Alex, in Master Tournament Poker in one class, you've got a quiz or a quiz question that's like, which of these is the most important? And it was keeping the betting lead. And that was another thing that I'd never thought of before that. Why don't you tell people a little bit about how you develop that, some of the data that is behind it? That's something that's important, is that we're not just pontificating here. Alex has backed this stuff up with numbers and from all of these students that he's worked with. So that's how we know that it actually should work in the real world.
What really helped me was, so around the time my first book came out, I got a bunch of emails from people saying like, listen, I don't have a lot of free time. Just if there's any way you could describe this to me in 3 or 5 hours, that would be excellent. I'll hire you as a coach. And I thought, okay, this is kind of fun. It's like being a college football coach, whereas, in the NFL, you can do more specialized assignments and you're working with adults and they're playing full time. So you can get really into the granular. College football, the kids only have so much time because they still have to tend to their studies. So I thought, okay, just the same way college football coaches have to condense everything they know into something very memorable, I'm going to have to do that when it comes to poker. So I started peeling open databases. So I've done private lessons every morning for 15 years. So I've looked at a lot of hands, tens of millions of hands of my students. And you start getting an idea for what will work and what won't work based on what most people do. So, and the one that just jumped out at me, the more and more I looked at it, I really wish I could remember what day this was, but it was keep the betting lead. Always be the person betting, always be betting or raising, always be asking yourself, is this a value bet or bluff? What hands call or fold? Because what I noticed was if you three bet pre-flop, even if you were getting a little out of line, almost always your opponent had opened a little too much and then called too many, had called too often versus your three bet. So generally you were able to exploit that person. So even if you were getting a little out of line, even if you didn't follow that just perfectly, you usually were going to get away with it, especially with North American players that are very undisciplined, to be perfectly honest, when it comes to their opens and pre-flop calls. When you're betting, the vast majority of the poker population folds too little, calls too much, raises too little, and bets too little. So if you check back trying to get a bluff bet on the river, it'll work sometimes, it won't work other times, and it's actually pretty hard to predict. It's unless you have a lot of statistics on the person, then you can know what you're looking for. But oftentimes it can be just based on that person's attitude that day. If they're really angry, they missed a draw for the fifth time in a row, they might lead out. If they're actually feeling really good about their life that day, or they just had a nice juicy cheeseburger, they don't lead out on the river. So there was no real way to predict it when it came to just trapping people. But I noticed 9 times out of 10, if my students bet even just a little too thinly, usually they were right because most of their opponents just called too much. And if they were bluffing just a little too much on specific boards, it would work pretty well as well. So I started just telling them, like, listen, you want to be in position bigger pot, superior hands, heads up as much as possible. You can apply that. And you want to be the person betting. You don't want to be the person calling down, because if you're calling down, there's only 2 ways to win when you're calling or checking. Actually, there's only one way to win. You have to have the best hand. It must remain the best hand. That's really hard if you end up folding at some point. If you're betting, there's so many ways things could work out. You could have the best hand and you get a worse hand to call you. You could have the worst hand, but you get a better hand confused and it folds. You might have the worst hand, but the better hand is so confused as to what you're doing, they start playing really slow and giving you extra cards. So stringing all of those things together and keeping the betting lead was just doing wonders for people who were, hey, I'm a school teacher. I just got into this. It's only been a couple of years. I only play charity games, pub games, whatever it is. I want to take a shot at my first series. And it was so gratifying to get the emails back from folks saying, hey, I got my first cash. It was thanks to you. And that meant a lot to me. And yeah, now it's really fun to put it in book form.
Yeah. And I think that illustrates right there, as you saw how complex that got in a snap of the fingers of what Alex has looked at, and then to take that and distill it into concepts like be in position, keep the betting lead. Don't treat position like something that just happens. Fight for it. That's a reason to 3-bet pre-flop. Maybe that keeps you out of a multi-way pot. Breaking it down into those little steps that you can remember at the table and actually make happen. And then you get the benefits that spill out of all that data in the background.
Yeah, the ability to sift through all of those numbers, literally millions of hands, and figure out what are the key takeaways, boil it down to the most important thoughts. And then if you're ready to get more advanced, more detailed, you can do that later. But let's start off with, something that's real and accessible and something that people can really, just look at and say, okay, that's something that I can remember and literally do tonight when I go play at Mike's Garage or wherever else I might end up. All right, so the book is called Improve Your Poker Now, a guide for serious amateurs. I can't wait to read it. I've got a flight to San Diego next week, and that book is going to be my companion for the trip. So I'm very excited to delve into that. Now I want to make a transition into actually talking some strategy here. As we mentioned, GTO Wizard, our partner, they have different levels of membership, okay? You can become a basic member all the way up to, I think the top tier is called Elite, different things. But one thing everybody gets is the ability to analyze your play using artificial intelligence, optimizing your game with what they just upgraded the AI so that it's better and stronger than ever. And you can kind of look at the outputs and do exactly what we're talking about as it pertains to the book, which is, well, these different outputs are telling me something. Let's distill it down to what is it? And what I've learned is that I'm too bluffable on the flop. And so now I'm calling more on the flop. And so now it's not that you're going to go the other extreme and just become a complete calling station or something, but the wizard is telling me you're supposed to be calling this continuation bet with this hand and that hand and this hand. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been folding all of those hands all along. And then you can go to the next level, which is, what are the circumstances that would cause me to fold these hands, even though the wizard wants me to call with these hands? And that might be, well, I have an opponent who literally never has bluffed a day in his life. So when he bets, he has it. So then you can kind of go against the wizard, because the wizard is trying to beat another wizard, right? And most of us aren't playing against David Peters every day, so we don't have to really think in those terms. But anyway, if you guys want to try it out, I've got a great deal for you. There's a link in the description. You click that link and you get 24 hours access to all of GTO Wizard's features. And then after that 24-hour trial period is up, once you're ready to buy, you'll actually save 10%, but only if you click our affiliate link, which is gtowizard.com/p/TPE. And we'll also use that next week when we analyze this hand that we're about to go through again today. So, Alex, what is the hand? What tournament is it from? Who played it?
Well, if you're looking for theoretically correct, you've come to the wrong guy. This is
Excellent.
This is about to be a firefight. So, if I was your boxing trainer, to use that analogy, I'd teach you solid defense, a jab and a cross. This was me in just an absolute war with someone. So this was all defense got lost. It was, just Mexican warriors going at each other. So it's me and another reg. That's what you know so far. $44 six max. American facing site, but I don't know. Anonymous site. I don't know anything about this guy. On the button, the player has 240 big blinds. They have me covered. I have 102 big blinds in the small blind. Button regular. Has been playing good. Pretty good aggressive regular. Opens on the button to 3 big blinds. And the big blind has about 300 big blinds. I have 102 big blinds in the small blind. And we have pocket threes, 3 of spades, 3 of hearts. What would you guys like to do?
One question for you first, Alex. Do you remember what stage? This is probably early part of the tournament.
Early. This is the dog fight. Everybody's trying to get a chip stack.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, some players believe that you don't ever want to flat in the small blind versus a button open. It's either a 3-bet or fold. I tend to subscribe to that, especially when we're relatively deep. If I did have a flatting range, it could include certain hands like pocket threes, pocket fours. But then I'd also want to mix in like pocket aces, pocket kings once in a while, once again for balance. And if the big blind is as you're describing him, there seems like a chance that he might want to squeeze more often than maybe he should. So what I might like to do.
One clarifier, everybody here is a good aggressive reg. The button is a good aggressive reg. The big blind is a good aggressive reg. Sorry, I wasn't very clear on that.
Okay, no, that's good. So good to know. In light of that, I would 3-bet to about 4 times the open. So I guess about 12 big blinds. By the way, Alex, did you read anything into that large open sizing on the button?
That's been his typical open so far. He's just making it 3x, so not too much.
Okay, Topher, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think I'm with you on that. And if we were to break that down into terms from our book, 3-betting there offers the advantages of taking the betting lead back. Now, if you get 4-bet, then you're probably done with your threes. Probably gets you into a heads-up pot by getting rid of the big blind. So there's some substantial advantages there. Certainly there's going to be people out there who say, hey, we're super deep. This is a good spot to set mine against a couple of really aggressive people. And I don't think that you would put up a big fit about that if that was the decision. But I like 3-betting there too, and under these particular circumstances.
Yeah, and the problem with set mining, at least to me, is that you're going to be out of position anyway. So
Right.
even if we do hit that magical three, it's still going to be hard to like double up with such a deep
Yes.
stack.
Right.
So it
Yep.
feels like three betting is the way to go.
Yeah, and something I've noticed just looking at databases is the small blind cold call should do a lot better than it tends to. There's a lot of times, and I think my suspicion for why that is, threes maybe you could work in just because it's a very clear cut, you hit or you don't. But I think that what becomes the problem oftentimes with the small blind flat is everybody now knows you don't have your premiums. You would have three bet every premium and now you check call on the flop. Everybody knows if that flop came with flush draws and straight draws, you probably would have check raised your sets, your two pairs. You probably would have three bet your over pairs pre-flop. It's open season on you at that point. And also, when you flap from that small blind, it's really likely the big blind flats you. That really cuts down on your bluffing opportunities multi-way just because you have more people to deal with, more ranges to deal with, and you're out of position. So I agree with you, gentlemen. We three bet. I probably should have gone to 12. Let's see. There was about five big blinds in the middle with the blinds and antes. I went to nine. I probably should have gone a little bit bigger. So we go to nine big blinds with three of spades, three of hearts. Big blind folds, and the button flats us. Button has us covered. There is now 19.5 big blinds in the middle. We have 94 big blinds back. And the board comes Jack of diamonds, six of clubs, Jack of clubs. Go.
Jack, Jack, six is the flop, two clubs, and we have pocket threes without a club. We also have what you guys like to call the betting lead. We were the last aggressor pre-flop. So, the good news about this flop is that it is unlikely to have hit our opponent's hand. Anytime the board is paired, it's hard to have anything on a paired board. Alex pointed out that we are uncapped because we three bet. So we have aces, we have kings, we have ace jack, we have jack jack, we have a range advantage and a nuts advantage. And when we have those things, especially when we have a hand that, even if it is good, is extremely vulnerable, I think we must bet the flop. So I want to go for a small sizing here. I would probably put in about 5 or 6 big blinds into the 19 and a half and see if we can take it down. We're representing a much bigger hand than threes, but how many chips does this guy really want to put in? Topher?
I like that. Let me throw at you a couple things that we might talk about from the book, which would be always be betting. So it certainly would default in that direction first, but then knowing why you are betting. So the question that I would ask is, if you're throwing that bet out there, what are we trying to do? Are we looking for equity denial to try to fold out his big cards that have outs against us? Because if you bet small, you could, or are you betting small to try to get him to call with ace high or something like that, where you're actually getting value with your threes, but you're on a board that's already paired. Threes are at some risk there. So I think that betting makes some sense. But what we want our students to do when they read the book is to know, why are you betting?
This feels like a spot where betting, we benefit from calls by worse hands and folds by better hands.
Agreed. I think you get both.
Yeah, because I don't know if this guy has, say he has pocket sevens or, well, sevens would probably call, but let's say pocket fives, right?
Yeah.
He might call one bet on the flop, but eventually we're going to be able to get him off of his hand if we keep up our aggression on the turn, which we may or may not do, kind of depending on what comes off. Yeah, I think it is wise to often think in terms of what outcome do we want. But in this particular hand, it feels to me like I think sometimes I get value from worse, and occasionally I might also get folds from better hands.
And also you do get some equity denial, that any hand out there has probably at least 6 outs against us if it isn't, already ahead with something like pocket fives. And that's another thing that we talk about in the book is winning a pot, whether it's with a pre-flop raise or anything, is never a bad result. It might not be the best result. Maybe you could have won more, but anytime you're raking chips, you never went broke in a pot that you won. So I think that's another reason that going ahead and trying to take this down, if you fold out king, queen, that's fine.
So I agree with you guys, which is there's multiple reasons to do this bet. I'm not going to give you guys the specific reason I did this one. I will say it's tailored to a likely American reg, and that's as big of a hint as I'll give. But yeah, a lot of good things happen when you bet out here. Let's say they fold like fours or fives on the jack six, jack board. Great. You were dead to two outs. Let's say they fold 10, 9 of hearts on the jack six, jack board with two clubs. The guy didn't know it, but he actually had a lot of outs. So he just folded out a decent equity share in this pot. So we're good to go either way. Now, after this is when things get a little bit more advanced. So we fire and he calls fairly quickly. The turn is the five of spades. So the board now is jack of diamonds, six of clubs, jack of clubs, five of spades. There's 31 big blinds in the middle. We are playing 88 big blinds effective. What do you guys want to do?
So just go back real quick, Alex. What was your sizing on the flop?
Oh, I'm sorry. You said it almost exactly, Clayton, so I thought I'd already said it. 5.75 big blinds into 19.5. Excellent. We were right on the same page right there, 5.75 big blinds. And the turn's the five of spades. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I feel like because it's Alex, he's going to keep the pressure on. He knows that the fact that his small C bet got called on this flop doesn't necessarily indicate that his opponent has a jack or some other monstrous hand. And as well as I know Alex and the way he approaches the game, I'm going to guess that he would bet again on the turn, really trying to see how serious this opponent is, really representing pocket aces or a hand with a jack in it. Really, that's all we're repping, honestly. Maybe kings. But yeah, I think that Alex would know that the double barrel is likely to take it down more often than it would need to for this price. If he's betting only about a third of the pot, a little bit less, it doesn't really need to work that often to be profitable. And he's also got Alex always has that third barrel ready in case he wants to use it. So, we're not thinking just in terms of can we win the pot on the turn, but if we end up winning this pot on the river, it will actually have been a bigger pot because of the call on the turn. So we're building a pot that we might be able to steal on the end. But obviously, if we get called again, we'll know for a fact those threes aren't any good, right? Okay, Topher, go.
Right. I like the fact that I get to go second because then I can just get to say, hey, what Clayton said. But, I think that the smaller sizing on the flop is really important because, as you said, that keeps a whole bunch of stuff around. Another thing that I've heard Alex talk about many times before is that when somebody calls quickly, that's probably a sign that you haven't run into a monster, because if he was sitting there with a jack or he was sitting there with pocket sixes, he's going to need a second or two to figure out, okay, how am I going to get the most money out of this guy? So you're probably not dead to a monster. And at that point, you can feel a little bit more comfortable either trying to clean out your equity, or if he wants to call you again with ace high, okay. So I think that if you crunch the numbers, the likelihood that a bet here is profitable in one way or another looks pretty good.
All right, go ahead, Alex.
All right, so I check.
Okay,
And
thanks a lot.
hold that thought, though, gentlemen. We'll discuss betting on that turn. So we check, and our friend, the aggressive good reg, bets 20 big blinds into 31 on the jack of diamonds, six of clubs, jack of clubs, five of spades board. It is on you, gentlemen. What would you like to do?
I'll let you go first this time, Topher.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think that as I would read into this does not feel like Alex checking to give up in this hand. He's not suddenly saying, oh my word, the five of spades arrived, I'm done. So I have to believe that we're continuing here. Whether he is truly getting into a war where we're going to check raise, maybe so. And he said, this is a pretty good player who is aggressive, and perhaps that was the idea, was to try to appear to be waving the white flag and negotiate our way into a check raise. But I think that one way or another, we're not going away yet just because this guy has bet. However, just again to loop back, situational poker tournament dynamics. If this was a tournament where you weren't playing against a bunch of really good players, this might be a situation where you'd think about stack preservation to say, wait a second, am I going to punt off my tournament here on pocket threes when this guy is firing 2/3 of the pot against me? If you're playing against Joe Schmo, that bet looks a little bit scarier. And one of the things we talk about in the book is don't bust yourself. You can't make a great decision at the final table if you go broke in level 2. You can't get queens with 10 people left if you're out in the parking lot. So depending upon tournament dynamics, you might view this a little differently. But when you're up against aggressive players, you got to get some chips. I assume we're hanging around in some way, shape, or form.
I personally would fold. I don't usually find the call here, and I certainly don't think I could check raise such a large sizing now that we're getting down to close to pot commitment if we check raise. So I just, maybe if I had 200 or 300 big blinds in my stack, and then you have a lot more maneuverability against larger turn bets. If we do check raise, we are basically saying, I've got a jack or better, and I think you have something to call me with, right? Why would you check raise with a jack unless you don't believe your opponent, right? In other words, if you think he's bluffing, calling is better when we have a jack. I don't know. Just thinking through it, I want to fold. I really doubt that Alex would have brought this hand for the podcast.
Right. Yeah. That's the problem, is that you have this extra factor of something interesting is going to happen.
Yeah, but he already surprised us once. Maybe he threw it away.
Yeah. If we're going to kick 20 big blinds in here, we damn well better know what we're going to do on the river. Because the last thing that we want to do here is just call 20 big blinds with the intent to check fold the river, because that's a 20 big blind giveaway. That's another thing that Alex has harped on, that sometimes you've got a hand on the flop that feels like a calling hand, but then he asks his students, well, what are you doing next? What if he bets the turn? Well, then I'll fold. Well, do you think he's going to check the turn? Well, probably not. Well, then why the hell are you calling now?
Exactly.
So whatever we're doing here now, we need a plan for what happens next.
All right, gentlemen. So, see, and this is what's fun about doing the training packages. I can throw in a lot of fake outs. I can't go, it is a fold. But here, you're right, it is more entertaining. We go ahead and call 20 big blinds. The river is the 7 of clubs. So the final board is Jack of diamonds, 6 of clubs, Jack of clubs, 5 of spades, 7 of clubs. There is 71 big blinds in the middle. We have 68 big blinds back. What do you gentlemen want to do on this river? You want to lead out and rep that flush or check?
Okay, Alex. So the flush came in and some weird straight draw came in. Let me ask you a question, Alex. What was your reason for calling on 4th Street?
Oh, I can't tell you that. Then I'll give away the ending.
Okay, all right. Well, if I played the turn in the way that you did here, then I think we pretty much have to shove this river. We probably don't have a flush. We don't have that many flushes in our pre-flop 3-betting range. We could certainly have, ace, king of clubs or something like that. But there aren't that many flushes in our range. Most of our range for shoving is going to be sets that aren't worried about a flush. So we need an opponent to have enough respect for us that he would say, this person can shove with a value hand that isn't a flush. If we think that's what our opponent thinks of us, then I like shoving here as a bluff. If we don't think that, then I don't even know why I'm still in this hand, because I wanted to fold on the turn.
Right, well, it's not your problem. Not your problem anymore, right? You were gone. You're at the snack bar. You'll be back for the next deal. We do need to make an assessment of how sophisticated this player is. If this is a player that is capable of working backwards and saying, hey, this doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense for him to be jamming here, and I'm sitting here with pocket nines and I'm going to call, then we probably shouldn't have been here in the first place. If it's a situation where this decision is, if our opponent doesn't have a jack, he's going to run, there's probably enough of those scenarios that we can do this. And I assume that some line of that thinking has to have been involved when we called on the turn in the first place. There had to have been a game plan. I'm not sure what it was, and there may be a little bit of info that we weren't privy to that goes into that decision, but Alex would not have called that turn bet without knowing where he was going next on a card like this.
Right. An expert player like Alex is going to have a plan for every possible card. So it could be that he's going to give up on the river because he doesn't like that the flush and the straight came in. And the way our opponent has played the hand, it's very possible that he could have one of those hands. Maybe more likely that he has one of those hands when our range is more value heavy on the flop. When all the draws come in on the river, now kind of the balance of power, if you will, I think it's actually more likely that the opponent outdrew us on this river. That doesn't mean we don't want to bet it. But now it's time for something I like to call inside the mind of the Assassinato. Now tell us about 4th Street and the river. What did you do?
So we check here, and he bets 46.67 big blinds into 71. We have 68.23 big blinds left. The board is Jack of diamonds, 6 of clubs, Jack of clubs, 5 of spades, 7 of clubs. We 3-bet pre-flop, C-bet about 25% pot on the flop, check called the turn, a pretty sizable bet on the turn. And now we've checked the river and we're facing this bet. What do you want to do, gentlemen?
Well, I'll tell you what I would do in the real world. I'd be gone. Okay. I would say I'm not, I've got a perfectly healthy stack, and I can find better situations to play where I don't have to drum up 20 minutes of calculus to figure out why maybe I can justify calling here. But obviously you have taken actions by being passive on the later streets that at least would invite a bluff from big cards if this guy is capable of doing that. But you would have to have some reason to believe that that was a play in his arsenal before you're ever thinking that threes are good here. So you'd have to have a very good reason to believe that these passive actions that you've taken have successfully baited him into bluffing if you're going to bluff catch here with threes.
Now, the profile of this opponent is that he is a good, aggressive player, a good, aggressive regular. And so that is the case where you can say, well, very often when we check, after we make a small C bet on a paired board and then we check the turn, a good, aggressive regular is going to bet most of his range on the turn, whether he's got value or whether he's bluffing. He's going to put us in a tough spot no matter what we have, because our check on the turn basically caps our range. Although we did talk about possibly check raising on 4th Street, but basically our range is capped when we stop betting on the turn. So you're kind of opening that door for him to bluff you. But the question is a pair of trays a strong enough bluff catcher to put in most of our chips with it at this point? And I just don't know. I mean, I might rather have a slightly stronger hand in my bluff catching range, maybe something like pocket eights or something. If he bets the turn and then the scare card comes on the river, this player's good enough to bluff that scare card with a hand like, I don't know, let's say like ace queen with the ace of clubs, because he knows we don't have the nut flush. He can rep it or whatever. Would he have bet the turn with ace high? So I don't know. I mean, I'm very lost, and I don't want to talk anymore. I just want to know what's going on here. Alex, tell us.
All right, gentlemen. So here's the deal. Before I tell you what I do on this river, let's talk about fundamentals when it comes to playing against people at a slightly more advanced level. Typically, nits beat stations, stations beat maniacs, maniacs beat nits. That's one of the smartest things I've heard one of my students say. And if you really think about it, it's a big game of rock, paper, scissors. So here, Clayton brought up a really good point here, which is we capped our range. If we believe our opponent is just going off and being a maniac at this point, they're seeing red and they're the bull, we have to become a station at that point. Now, obviously, I picked this hand because it would be fun for a podcast, and it's a little bit wilder. But this was a situation where it's very likely our opponent is becoming a maniac, so we must become a station versus that. So what happened was I did call on this river, and my opponent turned over queen of clubs, 9 of spades. So what's going on here? Now, when you're playing against average American regs, one of the privileges of my job is I love the theoretical side of the game too, and I do enjoy studying that just as a fan of poker. But much like the FBI interviews serial killers to understand serial killers, I talk to poker players every morning to understand poker players. And I've spoken to a lot of American regs, and let me tell you, there's specific times they become stations, and there's specific times they become maniacs. Now, when the average American reg calls you out of the big blind, they are far more like a station than they should be. They actually are not really aware of what ranges they're supposed to be defending with, a lot of them. They just like calling there, so they call too much. They call versus too big of sizings. They call too large of their range. Many of them have no idea how much they're supposed to be check raising out of the big blind. I know you guys, I know Clayton knows more about this because of GTO Wizard, but a lot of these folks don't actually know what they're supposed to be check raising. So they become much more like stations, which means you need to viciously value bet versus them because nits beat stations. This is the flip side of that, where everybody becomes a maniac. So first of all, there are ranges you're supposed to open from the button. Everybody goes beyond that. When you three bet from the small blind, the on the button is actually supposed to fold a decent percentage of their range. Now, you guys play poker in the United States of America. How often do you see the button fold to that small blind three bet?
Especially if he only made it 9 big blinds. Like your three bet
Yep.
sizing was so small, I don't think anybody folds to that sizing as much as they're probably supposed to. 6 more, I'll put it in.
Exactly. And so now you have, if you were to alter the conditions in a sim, you now have he has a much bigger range than he should have on that button. And this is true of most American regs. So then the board comes Jack, 6, Jack. This is a board that most American regs go, he has the Jack or he has nothing. I can't fold here. So there actually are some hands he should fold here, but he's not going to because this is the situation where people become maniacs. I got to defend myself in position. I have the chips. This guy doesn't have the chips. I have position. This person doesn't have position. Let's go. I'm not folding here. And that's when you make your move. On that turn, this is very much like a boxer baiting a guy into a punch he shouldn't throw and having the counter ready. You check and go ahead, bro. It's all you. Go play your little heart out. And here we see what happens. He fires on the turn, and we have to be set up for the river. And we don't actually fold on that club river because he doesn't need to raise call like a king of clubs, 8 of spades, but he probably does. He doesn't need to raise call a queen of clubs, 9 of spades, but he probably does. So he's blocking a bunch of flushes on that river and says, I need to go ahead and fire here. But the big problem is he's caught with far too many unsuited groupings, which just blows up the combination count to kingdom come, which means we can make, I admit this is getting out of line, just check calling with the threes, because you never know when a guy's just turning a 5 into a bluff and you look like the world's biggest dumbass on this river. But I love doing that live too. Like 5, it's good. Like hard to beat the best. Yeah. But this is a spot where I set a lot of traps now, just because I've noticed so many American regs primarily just cannot stop going through the green light. And you're right, Clayton. When we check on that turn, he goes, hey, there's straight draws and flush draws out there. He's not checking a jack. He's not checking anything substantial. I have to fire at this. What he's missing, though, is we can actually remove some jacks on the flop. Because like Topher brought out, actually a lot of American regs have this tell. They beat you into the pot when they want you to stop betting, and they actually have to think for a few seconds when they're thinking about how to get the most money out of the best hands in their range. Goes back to that Mike Carroll, strong means weak, weak means strong. So likely, also Americans are very bad at trapping, in my humble opinion, because I don't know, there's like a shaming thing in the United States if you were trapping with a hand, and the guy gets there on the river, everybody at the table, for some reason, is going to offer the unsolicited, that would have never happened to me. That's your fault for not raising on the flop. So because of that, in Europe, they'll actually trap you a decent amount. And I like how they do that. They throw some traps in, which keeps you guessing. In the United States, the jack gets raised a certain percentage of the time, actually a higher percentage of the time than maybe it needs to be. And you got the timing tell right there, capping his range pretty well. So it sets us up for a really fun trap with pocket threes.
Unbelievable. And the way you talk through the logic behind it, it all of a sudden starts to make more sense. I mean, my guess of one of his bluffs might be like if he had a bare ace of clubs blocking the nut flush, but he's just blocking the queen. He's just got a queen blocker. And yeah, he doesn't even block the straight, right? So it's a very ambitious bluff by him. But maybe he's chip drunk too. He's got like 300 big blinds.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna fire because I can afford it. I'm just gonna dominate this table. But yeah, you never really know when you're playing online. You never really know what someone is like. But you had already figured out something about this guy's playing style in the early stages of this tournament, and this is an extreme exploit where you were able to turn your pocket threes into a bluff catcher and win a nice pot.
Well, it's to be fair, it's a lucky guess. It was a 6-max tournament. It's a pretty aggressive site now. So, I said maybe that most likely this is an American reg. I didn't have a terrific read. And just for full disclosure, I've totally called here before and been shown the goods, but it's worked more often than not. So it was pretty fun to share with you guys.
Yeah, amazing. And I appreciate you guys coming on and talking about your book. And well, let me ask you one more question about the book. Where do you want people to get the book? I know it's available in a lot of different places.
Sure. The ideal solution, there's really two. You can get it directly from D&B Poker. That's what D&B would love, because then they will be able to help you find other things that will be helpful to you, figure out what that next book in the progression is. So you can just go to dnbpoker.com. It's right there on the front page. It's also available at Amazon. None of us have any problems. You can buy it wherever you want. We don't really care. As I've told people, I don't care why you buy it. If you want to use it as a coaster, if you need a fire starter, buy the book. We don't care why. But from D&B Poker would be ideal. But Amazon's got it. My local bookstore's got it. Most bookstores are not carrying it, but they can get it. So if you go and ask, they will be able to get it for you.
And Alex, are you still doing your weekly newsletter?
Yes, sir. It's actually a daily newsletter. Daily. It's been daily for 5 years, and I have no idea how I've kept up with that. But yeah, if you enjoyed the strategic content you heard today, do go to pokerheadrush.com. That's my website. You can sign up for my free daily strategic newsletter. You'll get articles and videos delivered right to your inbox every single day. And just for signing up, you get 3 free training products. One is a classic training package. It shows you how to 3-bet everybody. There's a training package that shows you how to triple barrel bluff. And there's another one that shows you how to play ace king, even when it misses the flop. And those are gifts. It's free to sign up, free to unsubscribe, and you get to keep everything, even if you don't want daily emails from me. So yeah, go ahead and sign up for that.
Well, this has been a great episode. I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. I cannot wait to sink my teeth into Improve Your Poker Now, a guide for serious amateurs. So, Alex, Topher, thank you for being my guest this week.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was great fun.
And so for Topher Goggin and for Alex Fitzgerald and for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you so much for listening.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas plays. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Log in intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart.